Hello and welcome to episode 148 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by Chris Bello, a new friend of the show, writer at MMO, Satish Ram. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. The trade deadline has come and gone, and the very bad Mets traded a lot of players away because that's what you do when you're bad. Think there's still players that are here maybe we're surprised about. Not surprised there were a lot of transactions. Like I said, with this team being where they are in the cellar, they're going to be sellers, not to make a pun, but, that's kind of where they're at. It's disappointing the whole bit, but you kind of have to turn the page now, see the returns that the Mets get, and hopefully it can help them for the future. But before we kind of, dive into specifics, just want to get your thoughts on the trade deadline overall. Obviously, the headline of it all was, it's not Mets related, but, Tariq Skubal goes to the Dodgers. The whole world reacted about that. A lot of people aren't happy. Contenders could have had him for a price that wasn't that much, but we'll get to all that. But Chris, will start with you, just Mets-wise, just your reaction to the trade deadline for them and, just overall this past weekend.
Yeah, it was hard to judge. I thought they had a pretty modest trade deadline. I thought that with some trades, they obviously did very well. I thought the Clay Holmes trade to the Cubs was awesome. They get a guy back in Jefferson Rojas, who is a top 100 prospect. Hopefully can impact the ball club in the next 2 years. He's at Double-A right now. He's 21. He's a little young for the level too. So we could see him be like AJ Ewing, which is what Stearns brought up in the press conference, which is when you're in the higher levels, maybe you can rise pretty quickly, and maybe he's the Mets' third baseman in 2027. And then also when you look at all the other deals, like the Brooks Raley deal, that's kind of like a whatever deal. I'm not sure if we'll be able to name the two prospects in the next couple of seasons, but again, Brooks Raley is an older left-handed reliever. And then you look at the Luke Weaver trade, which we'll get into a little later, but I think that is a trade that's going to be pretty 50-50 as of now. Either you look at it and you love the potential of Sammy Stafura, who is obviously a great story being a Mets fan from Westchester County, or you look at it and you say, this was one of the best relievers on the market. He had another year of control, so you're not just buying a piece and he's going off into the free agent market the next year, but you're getting one of the better relievers on the market that you're going to have over the next 2 seasons. And it was a 1-for-1 that you had to pay down the contract to go and get that player. So overall, pretty modest. I think you can't be too upset about what you got in Jefferson Rojas. And then obviously the Freddie Peralta deal as well. I'm surprised that they got the level of prospects they got back for him. Just anything at that point, I was pretty happy with. But yeah, overall, I'd probably give it like a B-.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo some of the things that you said because I'm sitting around a B level myself. I think that some trades were admirably a little bit stronger on return than others. Some were a little bit of head scratchers. Not to just repeat what you said, but yeah, if you're paying down on the Weaver deal, I'm expecting a different return. At the same time, Brooks Raley, I was joking with you guys before about this. Brooks Raley's going to Philadelphia, and what happened? Where are we? We're just handing out to Philadelphia, saying, you know what? Here, just throw us some guys that prospect we'd put in parentheses because it's really just minor league organizational depth, arguably, and we're just handing them off to help the Phillies out. I don't know. But there are some things that I try to be considerate to when I'm thinking about giving grace to the deadline. Look, as Sal said, we have to be sellers, right? These are, for the most part, these are guys that were not part of the Mets' core future going forward. We're not necessarily going to be emotionally attached or really losing sleep over not having one of these guys over the next few months or even next year. Realistically, maybe in Weaver's case, sure, but overall, not that bad in terms of the guys that they moved. And it clearly, look, with the graduation of guys like Ewing and McLean and Benj and the trade of Sproat and Williams in the offseason, the Mets minor league system overall, their top 30 was looking a little bit bleak and looking like they lacked some depth. And you can say, at least objectively, they've injected about 10 guys into that top 30. Now, they may be on the bottom half of the top 30 outside of the case of Stafura and Rojas, but they have injected some life and some lottery tickets right back into where they want to be. And with the consideration of the fact that we don't know exactly what next year is going to be, maybe they don't panic as much about in terms of immediate getting guys at the major league level. They just want to stock up on the minor league side and see what they could do, give them a little extra time with their development system, which they clearly believe in a lot and has shown some good rapport and success of guys like Benj and Ewing, right, in their development overall. So I can give them a chance on certain guys. Like I said, overall, I think it's a B. They did good in moving out some names that we weren't going to really care about and we weren't going to need, and getting in some guys that have a chance to make an impact going forward. But certain trades specifically may have given me some pause. Certain returns gave me some pause, and I think it's fair for us to be critical in that way.
Yeah, no, certainly. Grade wise, I think you guys are fine there. Um, I agree that we're going to talk into, a couple of these I think that are a little head scratching. Before we get to Luke Weaver, I want to talk Freddie Peralta. Obviously, Chris, you mentioned him going to Tampa. You've surprised the level of prospects they did get back. I don't necessarily know a ton about them. I do know, though, they traded Freddie Peralta, half a year of Freddie Peralta essentially for Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat, right? Two players that I think are going to be impactful on the major league level. You see in Sproat having a pretty good year pitching for the Brewers. And I think back to a couple of years ago, the Mets were exploring options possibly for Garrett Crochet before the Red Sox made a trade for him. The Mets were, pretty staunch on not giving up Brandon Sproat or Jet Williams in that a possible Crochet deal. So I just don't understand that really there. I don't know what the value is. Hopefully, one of these guys that they got from Tampa can turn into something. Obviously, we know what the Phrays can do with their developmental system. So hopefully, one of these guys works out. But, I don't really understand now the level of what the return they thought they would get with a guy like that. You don't give him an extension, right? He didn't really pitch that well this year. It kind of just blew up in their face. You guys probably might know better than me. I don't know the level of what they're getting back. Is it a package better than a Sproat or a Jet Williams? Maybe you could tell me that, but I know those were two players that the organization was very high on for a long time and now seemingly just kind of gave them away for nothing.
I actually thought they nailed the Freddie Peralta trade package. I thought they did a fairly great job moving him. Not only because Freddie Peralta just statistically was one of the worst pitchers in the National League this year, but because they got a dynamic prospect back in Aiden Smith. And then they also got a kid back in Emilian Petrie who really, really looks like he could develop into a high on-base contact guy. Somebody think comparable to Jeff McNeil. Right now in the minor leagues, when you look at a guy like Petrie, he's got an on-base percentage over 400. He's hitting around 300, and he's just somebody in the higher level of the minor leagues to where you hope that it can carry over to AAA and maybe the major leagues. Then there's a guy, where he's got the funny name, which is Gary Gilhill, who's a local product. He's from New Rochelle, so that's pretty exciting. And he seems like a controllable pitcher that David Stearns today said he thinks that he can compete for a spot in 2027. So when you look at everything they got back for Freddie Peralta, I actually think there's a lot to be hopeful for. Obviously, the blue chip prospect is Aiden Smith. He's the outfielder that they got back. That was one of the players that was actually moved for Randy Arozarena back when they traded him to Seattle. And the power just hasn't clicked yet in the minor league. So he's got a lot of in-game power. He's a really toolsy outfielder. It's just about, can this Mets system develop a player like Aiden Smith? And it's almost the same thing with Sammy Stafura, not to make it about, the Luke Weaver deal. Can they develop these two guys who have really struggled in the minor leagues into these bats and these players where the potential is there? I don't know if they can. We've seen prospects like Ronnie Mauricio not develop. We've seen prospects like Francisco Alvarez fail to stay on the field and develop. We've seen guys like Mark Vientos, who similarly has a lot of power but strikes out a lot, not be able to develop. So am I confident the Mets can do it? I wouldn't say yes, but the package that they got back for Freddie Peralta, you can't deny it. They did a really, really great job, especially when you look at Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. Brandon Sproat has really struggled this year with the Brewers to a 5.06 ERA, I believe, last time I checked. And Jet Williams is really struggling with that wrist injury, which is why the Mets ended up moving him for Freddie Peralta in the offseason.
Yeah, the Freddie Peralta trade in the offseason really comes off as a rare lose-lose trade where nobody's better off, nobody's happier for it, and it makes everyone look bad involved. But to your point to the Freddie Peralta trade return in general, I think you're spot on. Look, I understand that Freddie Peralta has a history of being a high-level pitching contributor, but this year, his secondary stuff statistically was bad. The metrics behind the hood on Freddie Peralta did not look good. And the Rays paid a price as if they were confident that they were able to fix what was going on under the hood. But these are not no-name prospects. I'm not going to necessarily sing the praises of Aiden Smith. I know that, as Chris mentioned, he's correct that he's kind of the upside and the biggest name. And going into this season, he was the highest ranked prospect. But you look at the other guys, and I think that Gary Gilhill, again, 80 grade name, but one of the comps down the line that you hear from people for him, and he was higher ranked in Tampa system before going into this year. I know that they always talk about the fact that, hey, that the Braves know exactly what they have with their prospects, but it's not to say they've never lost a trade or never traded a guy that's gone on to be useful. And with Gil Hill's case, I do think that some of the comps we've heard, and you can close your ears if you're really emotional about this, but Marcus Stroman is the type of guy that he could turn out to be in terms of the fact that he is not a guy who generates a lot of whiffs, but his control is on point. His walk rate is really, really under control. And he is a guy that pounds the strike zone. He can mix it up a little bit. So again, if you get a guy that could give you the type of contribution the Marcus Stroman type of pitcher used to give you as part of this deal, along with a guy with great tools in the outfield and great power in Aiden Smith and a hitter in Emilian, is it Peter or Petre? I just don't want to mess that one up, but I know that he's got some generally, as Chris said, like Jeff McNeil type of skill set. He's been making great contact. He's overall showed a good walk versus strikeout rate. These are much more interesting names than I expected to get for Freddie Peralta at the deadline. That's as sincere as I can say it, especially from a team like the Rays who normally operates very strictly. I think that it worked out for us that they were willing to buy into the history of Freddie Peralta and not the few months of Freddie Peralta we've seen of him in a Mets uniform. And these are guys that immediately all end up in the top 30 in the Mets system. And they're spoken about that way to Stearns' credit. So kudos to that deal. I'm actually quite pleased because getting anything was an achievement for me. That was one of the high points of the deadline to say, okay, we got 3 actual prospects for Freddie Peralta who could turn around. And I mean, his ERA was touching 5, just as Sproats was not too long ago. I think he got it under to 4.99, but the point not being lost there that he just wasn't a fit here.
Yeah, look, and Freddie Peralta's xERA is a 3.79. So could he go to Tampa and absolutely bounce back? Yeah, of course. But I think it's naive to say that Freddie Peralta struggled here because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, Freddie Peralta struggled because he struggled. And Freddie Peralta is a massive reason as to why the Mets are sitting where they are right now. He did not deliver on that ace-like potential. I mean, remember when he got traded here? We were talking about when's the extension coming. He was telling his agent and the media that he wanted a $200 million deal. I mean, these were the expectations set for Freddie Peralta. And, you know, if Freddie was going 5 innings and striking out 7 or 8 to start, you know, we would be a little upset because that's not an ace-like performance in New York, but it'd at least be the norm and the minimum you expect out of him. So the fact that you can find an organization like Tampa who believes in the xERA and believes in maybe some of the underlying stuff can improve with them, and they also give up 3 prospects that, let's be frank, like they're strong prospects. It's a good return. So the fact that the Mets found a suitor that was willing to meet their needs, and also they're in a position where losing Freddie Peralta is not that big of a deal to that point, I think is a massive success by David Stearns, and you at least have to credit him for that.
Yeah, for sure. So, it'll be interesting to see how these guys pan out. Interesting to learn more about these prospects that they got back from Peralta, and hearing that it is interesting, especially from Tampa, to get back what they got. So we'll see what happens there. I do want to talk about Weaver a bit more, especially Chris. I know you were on the Zoom conference today with David Stearns and actually asked about that. So I think we're all surprised at the return there. I think the Mets even threw in a couple $1 million cash in that deal, which is ridiculous. Weaver's been, like you said, he's been the Mets' best reliever, one of the better relievers in the National League, and at the deadline, one of the better arms available. So I'm surprised that they only come back with that one player. I know we were talking a little before we got rolling that the Mets really must have loved this guy, but Chris, I just want to hear a little more kind of about that, and what you were talking about today at the presser.
Yeah, the indication I got from David Stearns about Sammy Stafura was that they believe that he is going to be a highly impactful player at the major league level. They are really excited about this kid. When not only me, but Tim Britton of The Athletic and other media members were asking him about Stafura, I mean, he was lauding about his defense. He said he's got tremendous defensive ability. He said he's a really good base runner. He has a high ceiling and clearly has power. I mean, he was talking about Stafura like they expect to develop him, and he is going to at some point be a New York Met and make a major impact. So that's why when we were talking about it at the beginning of the podcast, I was really saying it's a 50-50 split. I really believe that this organization was willing to trade Luke Weaver and forego him impacting the 2027 season because they believe strongly in Sammy Stafura. And the question I basically asked him was, how was the market? Was it robust? Did you guys feel like you had to pay down that contract to get a player like Sammy Stafura, or was it more of like, we're not getting what we want, we'll pay some of it and we'll get, the 9th ranked prospect in the Pirates system? And he dodged the question a little bit. He didn't want to get into the specifics of it, but he said that Steve's willing to make an investment. He's willing to commit in this team and its future to winning. And they're really excited about Sammy Stafura. So the inclination I got was that they are really excited about this kid. And whether or not he makes an impact at the major league level is to be seen. Yeah, he's got the 19 homers, but he's in high A and he's 21 years old. He's striking out at a 34% clip. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not too excited about it. I think that was one of the biggest whiffs out of any team making a trade at the deadline. I mean, we're talking about Luke Weaver. Like, he was probably the best right-handed reliever on the trade market. If you go and you look at ERA, strikeout numbers, inherited runners left on base, I mean, Luke Weaver was up there, if not the top relief option. So to go 1-for-1, and what you were saying, Sal, they're covering $8 million of the final $13 million on his contract. They're covering 2 this year, and then they're covering 6 next season. So again, like, all of this just says to me that they love Sammy Stafura, and whatever they see with the strikeout numbers or the on-base percentage, they think they can fix that in the minors.
Yeah, this is an interesting case because right off the bat, I mean, I'm going to mention exactly what you said about the money being paid down. And it's a great question of you to throw Stearns' way. It makes perfect sense to me that he kind of avoided it. But it is a great thing to think about. Like, hey, if you're paying down the contract of arguably the best reliever available at the market right now, who does have closing experience in the past as well, you would expect to get a really strong return, a noticeable return. And so it comes down to the fact that the Mets must really believe in Sammy Stafura. And now, granted, Sammy Stafura believes in the Mets, as he's a local guy who loves the Mets. He was very excited to come over to the organization. So emotionally, I will say it is nice to have somebody who loses their mind over coming over to try to contribute for the Mets. That's sweet, right? Because we know Mets fans are kind of one breed that are very much live or die by the Mets. So I respect the fact that he's so open about it. He's been tweeting at Mets admins for years. He follows Mets accounts. He clearly cares. That's nice. Production-wise, though, I have my fears similar to what Chris is saying. I mean, when you go back and break down the fact that in the last 47 games, I think he's got 19 home runs. He had a 14 home run month in high A. So people are saying, wow, 14 home run month, the power's there, right? But he also struck out 62 times in those 40 games. And earlier in the year, in May, his OPS was something around 531 up to that point in the season. Now, they have tweaked things in his swing. He has looked better. He's looked like a world beater, but it's a tough one for me. Look, if this was a guy in our system, I can sit there and get excited and say, oh man, like maybe they figured something out. I put on my blue and orange glasses and really get excited. But the truth of the matter is that it is very possible, with all my love and respect to fellow Mets fan Sammy Stafura, that he is on a hot streak of all hot streaks, and we're not exactly sure of where his ceiling is going to be because, as Chris mentioned, his strikeout rate is still very high. There's still questions about the amount of contact that he can make, and if he can continue to do that at higher levels when he's facing different types of pitches. I'm a little nervous in that I feel like that might have been the most underwhelming of the returns. Now, granted, he is a high risk, high reward type of guy. He's got a good run tool. He is generally considered to be somebody whose fielding can be at least average. This could be a guy that they really think they see something in over the last 2 months. They think he's going to be a superstar. And if so, I mean, to get somebody like that for a relief pitcher in a vacuum sounds great. But it's really going to come down to the fact of whether the Mets can develop him or not. And this could be something that in 2 years we look back and say, wow, Stafura was the return for Weaver. What a great masterclass move. Or we're going to sit there and say, I really can't believe that our original thoughts were true and that all we got was Sammy Stafura and he might be middling around in AAA.
Yeah, and I also think that's a great point because it's something that David Stearns brought up himself in the press conference, which was, there was an internal debate within the organization. Should we move him now or should we hold on to him because we're trying to win next season? That this is a point that I don't want to get lost in any of this. Like, they're expecting to compete in 2027. They expect to win next season. So if they really thought that Luke Weaver was going to be a guy who was going to stay and contribute and be a part of them trying to win a pennant, they would have kept him. But he said in the press conference that when you move relievers midway through the season, you tend to get more for them because people are desperate. They know what they need heading towards October, and they're willing to part with maybe a player they wouldn't during November, December. So when they take Luke Weaver and they trade him for Sammy Stafura, again, that's just another indicator to me that, hey, this guy can change our organization. This is a prospect that we can develop who can be a major league talent. And again, yeah, all of this power and all these impressive numbers are coming in such a short sample size. It's really hard to justify, at least in my mind, giving up a guy like Luke Weaver when, according to David Stearns, the market was so robust that they didn't have another package, say, from maybe the Brewers, maybe the Dodgers, maybe the Yankees who need a reliever right now. They thought that Stafura was the best package out of every single other team. So is he going to be that guy? I don't know. Are the other packages maybe better? He wouldn't get into it. But David Stearns believes that the best way for the Mets to win in the future is not with Luke Weaver in 2027, but it's with Sammy Stafura in maybe 2029, maybe 2028. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. But it's just it's a little head scratching when he picked up all of that money on the contract and they one for one him with a 21-year-old in high A ball. And just one final point, too, like the sample size is so short. There's not even stats on Fangraph for his O swing and his Z swing, which basically says how often do you swing at pitches in the zone and how often do you swing at pitches that are outside of the zone. That's how short the sample size is in high A for a 21-year-old.
Yeah, they really feel like they have a feel for what he can do because at least I'll say to finish up my thoughts on it. In a vacuum, the second best prospect that we acquired rankings wise in this deadline was Sammy Stafura, Jefferson Rojas being the top one, right? So there's a lot of faith that these guys can inject something into the organization. A couple of years ago, when we had a big selling deadline where the Mets paid down some contracts, we got a lot of sexy names at the time, but a lot of those guys may not have turned out to be what they were as advertised as. And so in this case, they may have done the opposite where they didn't necessarily get a whole bunch of beautiful names, but they got a lot of quantity with tools that they feel like they can develop. So, I mean, it'll really come down to we'll see this return. I mean, and we know this with any trades, right? You'll never be able to judge them on day one. You can only give kind of an overlook and saying, okay, the value seems to be about what I'd hope for. But if this is the second best prospect they got, there is whether it's his fault or not, going to be a lot of pressure on Sammy Stafura to show up, and the rest of the year there's going to be a lot of eyes on him to see, hey, at least early on, did the Mets make the right move in pushing their chips in the middle and saying, this is the best package we got? We have openly said that. This is the guy that we wanted. So I feel like there'll be more pressure on him than almost any of the other prospects acquired, just based on the way the Mets fan base is and how we look at things, to see how well he performs right off the jump if he can continue this hot streak.
Really interesting. You would think that this guy was the number one prospect in baseball, the way it's going to be contested like this. So we'll see what happens, right? And like you said, in a couple of years, that'll kind of be the crystal ball. We'll know either way. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I want to touch a little bit more on the Clay Holmes, Tyrone Taylor trade. It sounds like Jefferson Rojas is going to slot in like as the Mets number one prospect at this point right away. He was a top 100 prospect in the sport as it was. So I'm just curious, a little more to hear about him, what you guys think of him. And yeah, that seems to be like a consensus that was the best trade that the Mets did so far this deadline or in the deadline. You tell me what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. That was easily, to me, the best trade that was pulled off by David Stearns in the Mets organization. You give up Clay Holmes, who basically hasn't been a part of the team the last 2 months, but was pitching like one of the best pitchers in the National League before the injury. And then you also include Tyrone Taylor as a sweetener to get the number, I believe, 63, according to the MLB pipeline prospect. I really like it. Again, a 21-year-old in Double-A. I think he has the tools to rise through their system pretty fast. Third base is a position of issue for the Mets, and it probably will continue to be until somebody just takes the role. It has been since David Wright. So I think this is somebody who, if he has to spend the whole year at AAA and Bo Bichette doesn't opt out, fine. If Bo Bichette does opt out and they want to give him a look in spring training to win the job, he has the tools and the potential to go out and get the job next spring training. So I really like it. You know, he's got a 338 on base percentage in his minor league career, and this year it's at 339. You know, he's got a 461 slug in Double-A. He's got 15 homers in around 91 games. So it's just somebody you're really excited to see. Hopefully he's a guy who can come up into the major leagues and he can hit 20 home runs a year. He's a little bit of a stolen base threat. He's got 17 this season as well. So he kind of fits that contact, a little power, stolen base attribute kind of player that David Stearns tries to go and get. So I really liked it. I think that he is deservingly so the number one prospect in the Mets system now.
Yeah, I think that comes without really any kind of debate that he is definitively the number one prospect in the Mets system. And so I said this to some of the guys earlier, and I'll say it again here. If you can come away from a deadline, you didn't move a core piece, and you added a new top prospect in your system, I've got to say that that alone makes it a resounding win, right? And you moved a guy that in Clay Holmes that if you really, really felt like you needed him again, well, most likely he's going to be a free agent in a few months, and you could go after him again if you really wanted to. And he was not going to change the direction of this team in the next couple months. So kudos for getting the value. And same with Tyrone Taylor. As much as I like him emotionally and we've had fun with him being here, Tyrone Taylor is a fourth outfielder who has been slotted into more roles here with the Mets and started more games than we might have anticipated him starting. But with them keeping Robert and with Benj and Ewing existing and Soto at some point coming back, there was going to be limited time for him too. So the fact that Holmes and Tyrone Taylor resulted in your best prospect and far and wide ahead your now number one prospect in the system, I think this was probably the highlight of the trade deadline. And it's easier for me to talk about it in such a happy way now because that was the last trade we did. Just mentally, that was the last one that we saw go on the rim, and we could say, okay, they got something good out of it. He's got a much more cleaner, stable profile than Sammy Stafora. He's been showing it for a little bit longer. He is the quintessential top 100 prospect. So overall, I mean, this is just a resounding win for the Mets. One of the best things about it is that I think they were able to extract extra value because Jefferson Rojas is actually blocked at the major league level by the Cubs organization, by the infielders that they have. And that works out because he is a high value prospect, but the Cubs necessarily didn't have a place for him. So this works out to be a great situation where we're able to say, okay, we'll take a top prospect off your hands if you're not going to play him, and we can try to develop him. And he's already at a further advanced level. As Chris mentioned, third base has been a rotating black hole for a long time. And it would be really nice to have a guy that has the capacity to be, 25, 15 or anything, just handle third base and kind of make it his own just because of what we were spoiled at 15 or so years ago with David Wright. So the point of the matter is not to harp on it too much, but he is easily the best prospect return that we got at the deadline. He's definitively the now Mets number one prospect. And I do think there's a lot of reason to have hope about Jefferson Rojas, and that could be a very big defining thing looking forward because this is a guy that could be contributing, if we have a season, towards the end of next year. And this is going to be a really big deal for the Mets. So kudos on that return for what we gave up. I'm really happy that turned out that way.
Yeah, just to build off that as well, I thought something that was very eye-popping in the press conference was David Stearns talked about how hard of a worker that Jefferson Rojas was. And obviously that doesn't really mean anything until we see him at the major league level, but he's a third baseman, he's a shortstop, and he also plays second base. These are all positions he has played in Double-A this season. So, God forbid Francisco Lindor goes down again next year, we probably see Jefferson Rojas come up and play shortstop. If Bo Bichette opts out, they can have a battle between him and Brett Beatty for third base. Maybe Marcus Semien, who is continuing to get older, also deals with more injury next year. Now you've got a guy who can go and play second base. So I really like the ad by the Mets with Jefferson Rojas. I think we've all kind of seen enough of Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos, and Brett Beatty to know who they are, to where maybe it's time to give a newer, younger prospect an opportunity to go and take the reins.
Yeah, and to add one last thing to that, I do think that they've had at least a bit of a focus on certain players that they've been targeting. I mean, if you expand this further to the guys like Billy and Mick, power tool guy, right? Or the power that they may have seen in Stafora. Overall, some of the infield guys they've got, like Agbayani's son and Bruin, right? And Peter. And again to Jefferson Rojas, ideally their gloves work enough that you can move them around the diamond. So it gives them some flexibility where, okay, Simeon declines so much that we can't move him at second. Sure, one of these guys will play second. And you can even consider Mitch Voigt as part of that conversation because Mitch Voigt has looked really good lately. And I think he was going to shoot up the rankings towards the end of the year for the Mets, right? But if you can't do it at second, they're fine. Okay, if you got to move Lindor to second, but you need Rojas to play shortstop. Voigt has played some shortstop too. Oh, we don't have somebody at third? Okay, one of these guys hopefully makes it out. So the idea that their glove can play enough that we can find them in position and dedicate them to it when they're at AAA, I like the logic of the options. I like the thought of flexibility. Clearly, they were looking for either flexibility in some of these guys or a specific trait that they really believe they could harness, a mixed power, Aiden Smith's power, right? Gabe Davis's fastball, those type of things. There were some traits that I could take away that if I really wanted to put on the blue and orange glasses, I could see why they targeted most of these guys. And I respect it if they believe their development is going to come through the way that it has so far in terms of the young guys we have on the team right now, not from the old guard, but the newer Ewing and Benj alikes.
Yeah, and I think the most comparable thing you can look at is Mets and the Brewers. You look at what the Brewers have built. You see guys like Sal Frelick, Joey Ortiz, not Braxton Garrett, Garrett Mitchell, all these tools, the athletic players who can provide a lineup with a tough at bat. And I think that's what David Stearns has been trying to build here. You look at AJ Ewing, you look at Carson Benj, you look at Mitch Voigt, who is rising through the system fastly right now, trying to get younger and more athletic, which is something that we haven't really seen from Mets teams just throughout history, honestly. I mean, let's go back 10 years. I mean, when you look at a team that, has Lucas Duda on it and David Wright, who's ailing a little bit, and Wilmer Flores, like those don't really scream athletic. Those base stealers, even when they had Asdrubal Cabrera and Neil Walker and Daniel Murphy. These aren't going to go out there, get base, steal a bag. This is an exciting time in the sense where they're trying to piece together that winning ball club. And even though they're in fifth place and it didn't end up working out the way they wanted it to, when you trade for somebody like Jefferson Rojas, it does give you a little hope in the sense that here's just another guy who is, he's right on the cusp of being major league ready. So the fact that you got him for Clay Holmes, who hasn't pitched in 2 months, and Tyrone Taylor, who's hit a couple of homers in the last couple of weeks, that's exciting. And I'm trying to have a glass half full approach to this, because if not, we're just going to be watching losing baseball for 2 months before a lockout. So I think it's exciting.
No, you're right, though. The athleticism and the power speed combo is clearly something they like to focus on. I mean, like I said, putting aside maybe a guy like a Mick or an Aiden Smith, who they just see, okay, there's a lot of raw power. We might be able to do something with that, sort of like Ryan Clifford style. But you look at, Benj and Ewing are guys that are like a 20-20 threat, or at least a 15-20 threat in Ewing's case, maybe. They look at the athleticism. They look at what they can produce. Jefferson Rojas, as you mentioned, a guy who steals as well. And same thing with Sammy Stafora. They can kind of run a little bit. They're aiming for something. I tweeted something the other day along the lines of the fact of watching Carson Benj in the outfield. I don't think I've enjoyed watching a Met play the outfield in years since maybe Juan Lagares. Right, but Carson Benj is in the outfield, and I get excited. I'm like, this guy makes brilliant plays. Like, he takes the right tracks. If he messes up on a read, he'll recover. He's got a good arm, and this is very refreshing in that way. So, to your point, I agree with that 100%. That they have an archetype, or at least that they're focusing on building that kind of gritty, next man up Brewers mentality in that way. And Stearns has done that with the bullpen, which is also why I think he felt comfortable moving out some of these bullpen guys. I mean, we traded. In terms of how many relievers did we move? We moved Minter, Brazaban, Rayleigh, Weaver. So we moved 4 relievers, and you're probably going to see 4 guys come up within the next week in terms of Jan and Lavender and Dedniel Nunez and guys that they believed that are going to get up there. Maybe Lambert and Ross make their way down there at some point too, that they're like, all right, next man up. We'll figure it out. We're not really at a loss. So the plan sounds good on paper. we'll see, because like you said, Chris, if not, we will be watching losing baseball, and we'll be here in a year again, and three of us will be talking about selling at the deadline again. So let's hope otherwise.
Yeah, great job, guys. This was really good. To your point, hopefully if there is a trade deadline next year, we're talking about the Mets buying, not selling. So hopefully that's the case. But really good stuff tonight, guys. Thank you for breaking all this down. We'll catch you next week as we kind of ride out the next couple months of the season, like we're saying here. We'll see what happens, see some of these young guys come up and play. Hopefully they get some pieces maybe for the future, but we'll be watching no matter what. So thanks a lot, guys. And as always, let's go Mets.